So here's the first lesson. We're going to work with something called Payroll. And you can see that we're going to set up a group of employees. We're going to give them some fake numbers, their hourly wage, and calculate, once again, with fake numbers, how many hours they worked. Then we're going to take those numbers and use some simple formulas to fill in these columns of data where we can see how much they get paid. Also, I'll show you shortcuts so that large numbers of columns and rows get rather tedious, but there are shortcuts in Excel to make it work fast. So let's get started with our first lesson ever in Excel. So this particular lesson on Excel, the beginning parts of how to use Excel, has been seen over 1 million times on my YouTube channel. So welcome. If you haven't seen it before, this is a great way to start using Excel. We're going to use Excel to create a spreadsheet for our business. We're going to launch the program and start a blank workbook. Now, since this is the first assignment that we're going to do with Microsoft Excel, we need to go through some of the things that you see in any spreadsheet. First of all, a spreadsheet is designed and organized according to cells. Just like in the game Battleship, where you have columns that are letters and rows that are numbers, you can identify cells such as this one such as G6. To enter in information into a cell, you simply click it and start typing. And so I'm going to type employee payroll. Press enter, and you notice that this cell, even though it extends into column B, really it is only in A1. Now let's use Excel as a payroll. We're going to keep track of the hours that our employees worked this week, and we'll keep track of their wages. So first of all, we need to put some column headings in. So I'm going to put in the title, last name, and then first name, and then I'm pressing tab between these keys so that the selection moves to the right. Hourly wage, and then I'm going to put in the date. Let's say January 1st and press enter. Over here I'm going to say that this is the hours worked, and this is their total pay. So I'll just put the word pay. Now you notice you can expand a column by clicking between the column headers, like between D and E. Now you can see the whole word. The next thing you need to do is you need to invent some names. So you get to come up with about 20 names, maybe 15 for your employees. I'll type them in now. Now you can see that I've invented names, last names, and first names. And now I'm going to give them an hourly wage. Each person makes about $15 or so. So I'll type in some numbers here. You notice when you type in numbers, they are right justified. When you type in the person's name in your spreadsheet, that they are all left justified. That's just a convention that Microsoft Excel uses so that you can identify letters versus numbers. Now, one of the items that you will most commonly use in Excel is formatting. These are all hourly wages. I'm going to select this range with my mouse by clicking and dragging. The first square is actually highlighted even though it's white. The other ones are gray. But what I want to do is change them into a currency. So I'm going to click on the dollar sign up here. And you notice that they all become dollar signs. They all are the hourly wage for each employee. Now let's invent a number for each of the employees for how long they worked. The average work week for a full-time person is about 40 hours. So I'll create wages, or I'll create the number of hours that each person worked in this column. After giving each employee a number of hours, we're going to start working with formulas now. Over here on this line, in this square, in E4, I'm going to create a calculated number, a calculated cell. If a person gets $15.90 an hour and they work for 40 hours, how much do they get paid? Well, fortunately, the calculations in Excel are quite easy to do. On my keyboard, I'm going to press the equal sign. And you notice up here in this area called the formula bar, we have an equal sign as well as the equal sign in the cell. Now I'm going to click on the cell that has the wage in it, $15.90. When I click there, the letter C4 is entered into the formula bar. C4 is the wage, $15.90. Now I want to multiply $15.90 So I'm going to press the Shift and the 8 key, which is the multiply sign, and then I'm going to click the 40, the number of hours that this person worked. So my formula is equals to C4 times the number that's in cell D4. When I press enter, it'll tell me that this person gets $636. If you go and change some of these numbers, such as if we added an hour here and I type 41 and press enter, the calculation is automatically updated. When you double click on a cell that has a formula, you will see that the colors correspond to the cells that you clicked. So C4 is in blue, which is this number, and D4 is in red. I'm going to press enter again, and it shows the numbers again. Microsoft Excel has a nice feature where you can copy and paste formulas. If I right click on this cell and choose copy, and then I click on the next cell and choose paste, it'll automatically calculate the next line. You can also highlight a range and choose right click and paste. It will fill down where all of those numbers are. Why does this one look like railroad tracks or a bunch of pound signs? It's because the value is actually too large to be held in this cell. So I need to make the column a little bit wider. And now it becomes visible. Another way to fill down, if you want to, you can go to the corner of a cell where there's a little green dot, and if you click exactly on the corner and drag your mouse down, it will also fill down the values in that column. And so now I've quickly calculated the pay for every single employee. One more thing that we're going to do with this formula is we're going to add a few lines at the bottom. I want to know who is the maximum, press enter, who is the minimum, press enter, what is the average pay, and what is the total pay. These numbers, max, min, average, and total, are just labels. But over here in this column, I'm going to put in a corresponding formula. Microsoft Excel has hundreds of formulas that are predefined. Here's one of them. You type in the equals sign, and then you type the word MAX. And you notice that these automatically are drop-down menus that show that this is one of the formulas that Excel knows about. After typing max, I use the open parentheses, which is the shift key and 9. And I'm going to drag my mouse across a range of cells till I come to the very top, release the mouse button, and press Shift and 0 to do a close parenthesis. So what this will do, it will give me the maximum of all of these cells. The maximum person is getting $45 an hour. And so you can see in this line here that Trent Mann is making $45 an hour. Now I'd like to know who the minimum is. So I'm going to do the same process. Type equals sign, MIN, open parentheses, and drag my mouse across a range, and I will tell it what the minimum is after I press Shift and 0, enter, and the lowly person in my office is getting $6.90. That looks like it's Paul Smith. Now what's the average employee? Well, I can type in equals and then AV, and you see there's a bunch of formulas for average. I just want this most simple one. I'm going to choose average. I'm going to select the range, close parentheses, and press enter. The average employee makes $16.48. Okay, let's take this range here of 3 different formulas, highlight it, right click it with the mouse, copy it. Now I want to click in the next column over, right click, and paste, and now you see that we have the maximum, the minimum, and the average for the number of hours that are being worked. Now you notice that these values are listed as dollars. They're actually not dollars. They're number of hours that the persons are working. So I want to change these formattings back to general numbers. Up here in the ribbon, where you will find the number formatting area, there's a small arrow that if you click it will bring up a dialog box that shows all different types of formatting for numbers. I'm going to select General and click OK. Now, why does this number have so many decimal places in it? It's because we are computing an average. It would be nice if we would just round these off to maybe the tenth place or the hundredth place. So let's go to these zeros here, and we're going to decrease the decimals that we're rounding to. So to the nearest tenth is good enough for us. So now we have the number of hours, maximum, minimum, and average for our employees here in column D. For column E, we could also find the maximum, the minimum, and the average as well. So let's highlight this group. I'm going to select this bottom right corner, drag to the right, and it fills to the right now, and it shows me that these are the maximum dollars that someone made, the minimum dollars, and the average. Once more, these are dollars figures. These are not hours. So let's change these to the dollars format. So I'm going to click up here on the dollar sign. And now we have the average, the maximum, and the minimum in the salary for this week. So now we've created the maximum, the minimum, and the average for each of these columns C, D, and E. We haven't done anything yet with the total. For the total, let's find out what the total number of hours worked was, and let's find out what the total number of wages that we've paid is. So for the word sum, we type equals SUM, and that will give us the total. Let's do Shift and 9, and then I'm going to select a range here. I'm going to select all of the hours worked, close parentheses, and enter, and you'll see that there were 695 hours worked in my shop. Now I'm going to fill this to the right, and shows that I made a lot of, or paid a lot of money for my wages this week. I'm going to change this to a dollar sign format, and it shows now $11,532. The last thing we should do is put our name at the top. So maybe C1 is a good place. Type in your name, press enter, save the spreadsheet, print it, and you're done with assignment number 1 for Excel. Welcome to assignment number 2 for Microsoft Excel. We're going to extend assignment number 1 using the payroll spreadsheet that we had created earlier. What I'd like to do in this assignment is add a new formula using the if formula, and also adding the idea of paying overtime to our employees. So you notice here in column D that we have the number of hours that each employee worked. The first employee worked 41 hours. We're going to give him a bonus for his extra hour of overtime. So I'm going to start by inserting a column here in column E. If I click the column header, the entire column is selected. I can right-click on the column header and choose the Insert button, and it will now give me a new column to work with. The first column, column D, was the hours worked. Now I'm going to say this is the overtime hours. The overtime hours is a calculated field, so let's come up with a formula that will tell us how many hours extra that this employee worked. At first it would seem simple. We would just say equals the number of hours the person worked, subtract 40, and that will tell us how many hours of overtime this person has. It works great if you have 41, but there's some errors if you have less than 40. I'm going to fill the column down, and you will see that when we come to Paul Smith in row number 8, he actually gets a -1 hours. It's a negative hours that he's worked. That doesn't seem to work too well. What we would rather give is Paul should have 0 hours of overtime, not a negative number. So let's revise the formula a little bit. So let's go up to here, and this time I'm going to type in an equal sign with the word if. If is a command that says let's take a logical test, and a logical test is either an equal sign, greater than, or less than, and then we'll give it a value depending on if that test is true or not. And if it's false, we'll give it a different number. Watch how this works. The question is if his hours worked is greater than 40 and a comma. The value, if it is greater than 40, should be his hours worked minus 40, a comma. And if he worked less than 40 hours, then let's just give him 0 for this column, which would be 0 hours of overtime. A close parentheses and press return.
So he still gets 1 hour of overtime. But now when I fill the formula down, you see that the people that worked less than 40 hours get 0 in their formula instead of negative numbers. And so this is the correct formula for calculating overtime pay. Now, how about the pay? What does that do? Let's go back and review this here. If I double click here, you will see that this formula takes the number of hours, the hourly wage, and fills it in column F. That's great, but now we give them a bonus for working overtime. So let's create a new column and call it overtime bonus. Now in this formula, we're going to calculate a bonus for the number of overtime hours they worked. So I'm going to say equals 0.5 and use the times sign. 0.5 times their hourly wage, so we're going to give them half of their hourly wage times the number of overtime hours they worked. What that does is it gives us a formula to give them time and a half, or 1.5 times for each hour that they worked overtime. Press enter. So since John Kern earned 1 hour of overtime, we give him his full 41 hours of pay plus an extra 50% of his pay for one of those hours. Let's fill this down and see what we have for the rest of the people. Some of the people have 0. This one got no extra time bonus because he worked 39 hours. Some of these people worked 40 hours and still got 0 time. Why? Because the formula is about how many hours beyond 40 that we're calculating. So they got paid their full wage for the first 40 hours. Now, how about the total pay? Let's put in a new column. The total pay is simply equals to their regular 40 hours of pay plus their overtime bonus and a return. And let's use the fill down option. Some of the numbers are too big, so we will expand the column. And this is their total pay. Down here at the bottom, we calculated maximums, minimums, averages, and totals for all of these formulas. Let's move these to the right. Calculate the totals now, and we can see what everybody earned, including their overtime. Welcome to assignment number 3 with Microsoft Excel. What you see on the screen before you is a final version of the payroll spreadsheet. You notice that it's got a lot of cells. Don't worry, most of these are copied and pasted. It's an extension of assignment number 1 and 2. In the gray area here, where you see hours worked, in the previous assignments we only were concerned with 1 week of pay. And this assignment we're going to add 4 more weeks of pay, and we will use calculations to find out how much they earned, their overtime bonus, and then here in the blue area, their total pay. So we'll start from an assignment here that we did before, and we'll simply extend it to look like the one that you just saw. Well, first of all, what we need to do is add some new columns. So starting in column E, I'm going to right click and choose Insert. I'm clicking on the column header. Let's do this a few times, and we'll give us some space to work with for other weeks in the month. Now, starting here in column E3, I'm going to add 7 days to this date. Notice the first date that we chose was January 1st. You can either type in January 8th for the next week, or we can use a calculation. Let's use a calculation. I'm going to say this equals this square, D3, plus 7. And now it starts at January 8th. Now, if I use the fill command, I'm going to create several more columns, and they're automatically calculated. Next, I'm going to invent some more hours. These are numbers that should be approximately 40. They can be a little less, they can be a little bit more, but it doesn't matter really what the numbers are, just so that we have some data to work with for each employee. Now, we've reached the end of our data for the number of hours for each employee. It looks like I've created one extra column here in column I, so I'm simply going to remove it by choosing right click on the column header and delete. Now let's go to the overtime hours. I'm going to put a date here for the week January 1st, and once again I'm going to insert some columns. You can actually insert columns more than one at a time. If you highlight 4 column row headers and choose insert, you get 4 new rows. Once again, I'd like to add 7 to the date that's in January 1st, this plus 7, and fill to the right. Now let's add some overtime hours. Now I want to calculate the hours of overtime for each week. Well, we've already done this in the previous assignment with this famous if formula. If D4 is greater than 40, then give us the value D4 minus 40, otherwise give us 0. I can take this entire block and copy it. I'm going to right click on it, choose copy, and I'm going to right click in the next square and choose paste. So now it's calculating the overtime hours for the week of January 8th. Let's double click on this cell, and you notice that we are now calculating the overtime hours from this blue square, the 42 hours from January 8th. So the formula automatically adjusted for the column letter. This is using cell E4. I'm pressing escape now, double clicking on this one, and you notice that this cell was using the cell D4 as its source for its numbers. So when you copy and paste, Excel automatically assumes that you are relatively addressing columns somewhere else in the spreadsheet. So if this is one cell to the right, then the next one is one cell to the right. I'm going to copy and paste again, so I'll copy this row here, copy and paste it, copy and paste again, and paste again. So now we have overtime hours calculated for every week. Now when you start to get a lot of cells on a spreadsheet, it can get confusing looking at so many numbers. So Excel allows us to paint the cells in certain colors. These cells here that I'm highlighting now are all related to the number of hours that they worked. Let's give them a color. Let's paint them all something gray. So now you can see that they all belong together as a block. For overtime hours, let's paint them a different color. Let's choose, you can choose whatever color you like, but I'm going to choose some kind of a salmon color. And now we're going on to calculate their pay. This pay here really is the pay for January 1st. So the week of January 1st is what they got paid here. Now I'm going to calculate the pay for every week. So let's insert about, how many? 3 more columns? And let's do once again equals the previous date plus 7. And then fill that formula to the right. Looks like we need 1 more column. I'll fill this one to the right. Now, how did we calculate pay? We simply took 2 numbers from their hours and the wage. Hours worked, which was 41, times their wage. We're going to find something new here. If we just simply copy and paste these formulas, we're going to get the wrong result. I'll show you what happens in a minute. I'm going to copy this formula, paste it for the next week. Now, why in the world is everyone making over $1,000, some up to $3,300? What happened? Well, let's double click on this cell and find out where it's coming from. First of all, you notice it's very difficult to see the other side of the world here. We can actually zoom out on a spreadsheet, and we can make it easier to see the whole page. So let's zoom out to 50%. We can see the whole spreadsheet now, but the numbers are a little small. Let's choose something else. I'm going to select the part that I'm interested in. Just these cells. Click on Zoom and choose Fit Selection. That will fit this highlighted area on the screen. So now I can see hourly wage all the way to the last formula. Okay, now let's go look in this cell here. What's going on in cell number O4? It says take the cells D4 and multiply by E4 and give me the results. D4 and E4. Well, that worked great while we were in the previous week. We were taking the hourly wage times the number of hours. Well, now the relative referencing is saying, well, let's take the first two cells and multiply them together. So we need to make a modification. This actually should be referencing C4. I'm pressing escape on the keyboard, and I'm going to delete all of this here. I'm going to right click on these and choose clear contents. What I need is what's called absolute cell referencing. So I'm going to modify my original formula here. It's telling me in this formula that we should use C4 times D4. And I know that I'm going to copy it to the right 4 times. Well, what I really want to do is keep referencing the hourly wage, because that's how you calculate pay. Hourly wage in C4 times the number of hours worked, which is going to be D, E, and F, and G, and H. So is there a way to tell Excel not to use relative referencing, instead absolute referencing? That's what we're going to call it anyway. I'm going to go up to this formula bar and modify the letter C. I'm going to simply type in a $ in front of it. That doesn't mean a value dollars. It just means that every time that you think about cell C or C4, you're going to always use column C. For the first week, nothing changes. All of the numbers should stay exactly the same. But now when I copy this range of cells and paste it into the next column, let's take a look at what this reference is. I'm going to double click here. You notice that it is still referencing cell C4, but now the other cell is relative referencing. It says let's move to the right one every time. And so it's now multiplying the hourly wage times the hours from January 8th, or the 42. I'm pressing escape on the keyboard. Now I'm going to highlight this whole range. This time I'm going to, instead of copy and paste, I'm just going to use the fill right option using the little square in the bottom right corner. It fills right, and all of the wages are calculated. Let's double click here. You see it's using their proper range. Its number of hours in this case is 30, but it's still referencing C4. And so now their overtime, their regular pay work is all calculated correctly. Well, let's give this range a separate color as well. This is our regular pay. So I'm going to highlight this section here, go back to home, and choose a color from the bucket. Let's see, this time I like green. Green for pay. Let's move to the right a little bit. Now we need to calculate their overtime for each week. Their overtime pay. Well, we've done that for the first week, but we need to have some more weeks. So let's insert 4 new columns. Choose the insert command. Let's put in a date for each of these columns. This one was January 1st. This one's going to equal the first cell plus 7. And then fill it to the right. And so we have all of the weeks for January. Once more, this is going to be a problem if we don't have absolute cell referencing. Right now, the overtime pay is correct for the first week. If we fill this to the right, we're going to have a problem. We're going to have numbers that are way too high, like this one. If I double click here, you see it's referencing overtime hours, but way back at the beginning it is referencing not the wage that we're expecting, it's referencing cell D4. So we're going to have to change this formula to use absolute cell referencing again. So I'm going to clear these, highlight all and choose Clear Contents from the menu. I'm going to double click on this formula, and instead of C4 I'm going to reference it as $C4, and I'm going to copy this formula all the way through the block. Here's another way to copy and paste through the entire block. I'm going to copy just one cell and then highlight the entire place where I want to use this cell and choose Paste. And all of the formulas now show the overtime bonus formula for each week. Okay, the last thing we should probably do is give this its own color. So let's use the overtime pay as a color such as, I don't know, let's pick something red. Something blue? How about blue? Blue is looking good. Now for the total. What in the world is a total going to look like? Now, first of all, I need to zoom out a bit. Let's go to zoom to 50%. Total wages. Well, the total wages right now is calculated using, it looks like, pay plus the overtime bonus. Looks great. Let's put in a date over this. This is going to be January 1st. And once more, we need to calculate equals this cell plus 7. And we're going to use a few more weeks of this. Now this time, we should be able to get away with using relative cell referencing. If I highlight this, and I'm filling to the right, I'm going to double click on the cell titles so that they all adjust to the proper width. Now let's check this one out. If I double click on this cell, what's it adding together? Looks like it's adding the pay from the second week times the overtime bonus for the second week. That's exactly what we wanted. Let's see it. Try another one here. I'm going to pick this one. Randomly choose one cell. It looks like it's adding the proper cells. So in this case, we don't want absolute cell referencing. The usual default settings for relative referencing work just fine. Let's add one more color and we'll call it a day. Let's go to a darker gray. One more thing that you might want to do is use the formulas across the bottom. I'm going to actually highlight this section here and fill it all the way to the right. We calculate the totals, the maximums, the minimums for every week. One more thing you might want to add here is the total pay for all weeks. Let's say January pay. And I'm going to put in a equals sum formula, equals sum, and then add up all 4 of these, 5 of these, with a closed parentheses. Let's zoom in a little bit so you can see better. Double click again. So we're adding up all 5 weeks that were paid in January. And then let's fill this down for everybody. And you can see now who is the top pay earner in the company. I'm going to copy this range, paste it over here. The maximum person is this one. Earned $8,000 this month. That looks like this line right here. Second from the last employee. Let's scroll to the left and see who that is. Second to the last employee. The name is Trent Mann. Now when you print, you're going to have a difficult time fitting all of this on one page. Fortunately, Excel gives us a nice way to print all things on one sheet. Let's go to the File menu and choose Print. Now, down here it says no scaling. We are actually using 5 different sheets of paper to get everything printed. It's going to be very wasteful. Don't do that. First of all, we can turn the paper sideways. So let's change the orientation to landscape. That helps a little bit. Now it's only 4 pages wide. It says scaling here. We can say this. We could fit all of the columns on one page, or fit all the sheet in one page. Let's try that. Okay, it's very small. Seems to work though. Let's save it and print it as this size.